Rel is now the worst support in the entire game after her adjustments, while Maokai Top has absolutely surged into meta with a sharp play rate spike this patch. And do you remember when knowing how to set up a freeze in low elo made you special? These days, you're considered a troll if you don't know what a freeze is. Problem is, challengers are so out of touch with the fact that everyone in low elo has improved, so if you ask for help, you just keep getting the same outdated advice. Or even worse, they give you tips that only work in high elo, like how you should sync up your wave crashes with your teammates in multiple lanes to set up invades or objective priority. The theoretically correct play is usually not what actually works in your own elo. Oftentimes, it's something that may seem out of the ordinary, like split pushing as an ADC that will give you way more agency. We teach you the correct way to play League like everyone else does, but also the adaptations that actually work in your elo, so you'll always have multiple great ideas for what to do to win games. We're constantly producing and updating our strategies with players getting better, so SkillCapped is by far the best platform for learning League of Legends. We're so confident that if you don't climb 5 divisions while actively using SkillCapped, you can claim a full refund. Our service has zero risk with the potential to save you tons of time in your climb, so make sure to give us a try. So in the pre-patch tier list for 14.23, we noted how one of the most underrated top laners that you could play for this patch is Maokai, and as the patch is rolled out, he's not so underrated anymore. Over in Korea especially, Maokai Top has seen a huge spike in play, with his play rate now sitting at around 9%. Western regions, on the other hand, have yet to catch on quite as much, as Maokai has around a 2% play rate in NA and EU. Now, whenever we see a big spike in play like this, win rate tends to go down as a result, but Maokai's win rate has literally increased this patch despite more players picking him up. That's just indication of a really strong champion, as more players first time in the champ is not leading to lesser results. The core build for Maokai is really what's pushing him over the top right now, as you go Unending Despair with Winter's Approach and Spirit Visage. There's just so much added healing and shielding that comes out of that build, which gives Maokai incredible extended fight strength. The build is super versatile as well, because if you're up against an AP top laner, then you can just swap the order in which you purchase Unending Despair and Spirit Visage. Looking at Maokai's matchups right now, there are two champs who you will want to try and avoid picking him into. Mordekaiser is one, and then Fiora is the second. Mord loves playing into these tankier champs like Maokai because Mord does a really good job at outlasting in extended fights. Fiora's W makes it very difficult for Maokai to freely engage with his own W in lane, and as the game drags out, Fiora's percent health true damage is going to eat away at Maokai in the side lane. Other than that though, Maokai is faring incredibly well for this patch, and you'll want to take full advantage of him while you can, as we're moving him up into the top lane OP tier. So Maokai gaining in popularity is the only bigger trend shift up in the top lane for this patch, so the tier list won't be changing very much. One other adjustment we're making is moving Mbessa up into the OP tier, as she continues to excel with players becoming more accustomed to the pick. If you're looking for a good answer to Mbessa in the case you don't want to play or ban her, Renekton is one of the better options. Mbessa can't utilize her mobility to outplay as much in the Renekton matchup due to his point-and-click stun from W, and Renekton also has the shield breaking mechanic built into his W, which negates the shield from Mbessa. A few matchups that we're seeing Mbessa absolutely thrive against right now are Aatrox, Cassante, and Yone. Unlike Renekton, Aatrox actually heavily relies on landing skill shots to deal his damage, so with Mbessa's mobility, she can do a great job at dodging out on that and can outplay Aatrox way easier than Renekton. Moving on to the jungle now in our pre-patch tier list, we theorized that with the buff to Rammus's Q, we could see a new optimal skill order emerge for this patch, and we now have some data to back that up. W max into E second and then Q last is actually what has been winning the most now on Rammus in 14.23, outclassing Q max by over 1%. Last patch though, prior to the Q buffs, this skill order of W first into E second and Q last had a 1% lower win rate than Q max first. So due to the Q changes, it's now looking like maxing the ability out last is actually quite strong. After all, the main reason to why maxing Q over W was so good in the past was due to how much the cooldown of Q dropped from the first rank to the last. It went from 16 all the way down to 6 seconds, but now that it's at 12 seconds at rank 1, there's no longer as much incentive to max the spell out first. By going for the W max, you just have a lot more early dueling threat, and your clear speed is also so much better. So if you're playing this new skill order on Rammus for 14.23, then he's in a really solid spot for solo queue, and you'll find him in the jungle A tier. We're not always going to predict everything correctly, so even though we were right about Rammus, Rengar is one champ who we missed the mark on. We were optimistic that the buffs for this patch would lead to Rengar finally escaping the jungle C tier, but with the buffs now on live servers for a few days, they haven't really translated into any significant uptick in success for the champ. As a matter of fact, Rengar's win rate has actually gone down this patch despite the buffs, which is not something that we see very often at all. So we're going to be moving Rengar back down to the jungle C tier, as there are many more stronger and easier options than him for solo queue. So if we have a look at the jungle tier list now, our pre-patch predictions were pretty accurate for the role. We had moved Wukong and Nocturne up into the OP tier, and with the patch live for a few days, it's looking like that was the correct decision, as both champs are excelling with how the patch is played out. We will be moving Graves back up into OP for mid-patch, because the nerfs to Ghost Ghost Blade and the Collector have turned out to be just not quite enough to take away that OP standing from the champ. Any sort of extra nerf in the coming patches, and Graves is definitely dropping down though, so take advantage of him while you can. Our Master in Minutes course on Graves that is up on our website is a great resource if you're looking to learn the ins and outs of the champ before picking him up. A few other adjustments include Teemo and Zac being moved down one tier further from mid-patch, as their nerfs are proving to be a little bit more impactful than we predicted. This patch, we saw some massive overhauls to Aurora, Smolder, and Rel, and Aurora is definitely the champ who's benefited the most out of those three. We've seen a win rate spike of just over 1% for Aurora, which is pretty significant considering Riot intended for the changes to be power neutral. The big changes were to Aurora's passive and R. You no longer get movement speed from the passive, and instead just get movement speed when using W. This makes Aurora a little easier to play, as being able to refresh her passive movement speed was something you had to be cognizant of. So now that you just simply get movement speed when using W, it's lowered her skill floor a bit. And then for the R change, even though you no longer trap enemies inside of it, the duration of R went up by a whole 1 second at rank 1 and by 1.5 seconds at max rank. This allows for Aurora herself to be more shifty, and if the enemies try to escape her R, then they are still slowed by 75% for 1.5 seconds. So overall, the changes have landed positively for Aurora, and she's now back in a really solid spot for solo queue, so we're moving her up into the mid lane S tier. So with the season coming to a close here, it's not looking like we're going to be seeing any big shifts in meta until the preseason patch comes around. OP tier is going to stay the same for mid lane, as we've got Ahri and Vex leading the way. We're going to be adding Ambessa to the mid lane tier list for this patch, as she has been finding some pretty good success in the role. Ambessa mid is faring very well into other melee mids, and is only really struggling against more longer range champs like Syndra and Hui. The champ actually has a better win rate in mid than she does top right now, which makes sense considering how well she fares against the more squishy, commonly picked melee mids. Other than the Aurora adjustments, Azir was the only other mid lane champ changed for this patch, and the buffs have actually been somewhat impactful. Azir is still on the weaker side relative to many other mids, but the buffs have been enough to warrant a move up into the mid lane B tier. So if we jump right into the ADC tier list, we have a bunch of minor shuffling going on for the mid patch. OP tier is now just going to consist of one champ, being Corki. With Kate leaving the OP tier this patch, and with the Wild Arrows buffs not being overly impactful for Jinx, Corki reigns supreme right now. Kate is being moved down one tier further, as the nerfs that she received this patch have panned out a bit more detrimental for her than we were expecting. Nerfs to the Collector didn't really hurt that bad. However, Samira is one ADC who is just so reliant on the item, so she's lost a bit more relative power than most and is being moved into the B tier. As for the Wild Arrows buffs, we're really not seeing the item overly excelling on too many champs right now. Jinx is definitely the champ who has found the most amount of success with the item, and it's now her best rush option, but other than Jinx, no ADC is building it at the same rate. Sivir is one other ADC who is the closest to having the same amount of success with Wild Arrows as Jinx is. The item is still very underplayed on Sivir right now, but Wild Arrows does have the exact same win rate as Essence Reaver for 14.23. So if you're a Sivir player, then definitely try the item out and see how you like it, as it's a Wild Arrows rush into IE second and Flicker Blade's third that has been finding a bunch of success on Sivir. The Smolder adjustments have turned out about as power neutral as you could have asked, as the champ's win rate has stayed the exact same from last patch to now. This means no further movement for Smolder on the tier list, as he's still on the weaker side. A few ADCs who are quite underrated right now, but who have become indirectly stronger over the past few patches include Vayne, Sivir, and Xayah. None of those champs got hurt by the Collector's nerfs, while we have seen quite a few ADCs directly nerfed recently, so it's just given Vayne, Sivir, and Xayah a nice boost in relative power. So the big talking point down in the support role for 14.23, without question, is the obliteration of Rel's solo queue viability. Credit where credit is due, Riot actually did a pretty good job with the Aurora and Smolder changes, not overshooting in one direction or the other, but they definitely overshot with the Rel adjustments in a negative way. We did note in the pre-patch tier list that we were worried about the Rel adjustments because of the fact the Riot has taken away some of the chain CC power of Rel. Even though they did compensate her elsewhere, so much of Rel's strength comes from her ability to lock down a target for an extended period of time. So with that now nerfed, she's lost a bit of what's made her so impactful. It's been about a 3% win rate dip for Rel due to the adjustments, so definitely not what Riot was hoping for here. It's very likely we'll see some follow-up buffs in 14.24, so until then, we would definitely advise you to stay away from Rel for the time being, as we're moving her down into the support C tier until further notice. So Rel falling all the way down from S into C tier is really the only major change to the support tier list for 14.23. We've still got Poppy, Vel'Koz, and Lulu as the 3 OP tier supports, and all of them bring a different type of playstyle, which is quite refreshing. This season, especially when Warmogs was OP, the meta for support was entirely dominated by melee champs, but right now there's actually a really good mix of everything on top of the solo queue meta. If you want to be the carry yourself, then Vel'Koz is a phenomenal champ right now after his buffs from last patch. For a more roam-centric engaged support, Poppy is outclassing everyone else at the moment, and if you just want to sit back a little more and play to scale because your ADC locked in a hyper scaler like Jinx, Lulu is a very powerful pick. Alright guys, one last thing, our rank up guarantee is insane. It's like signing up for the gym and getting a refund if you don't get ripped. That's how confident we are in SkillCapped. We obsess over making the best guides with top players, rigorous testing, and top-tier video editing to make your climb easy. If you're ready to level up, visit SkillCapped.com and see the difference. So that's going to be all for our 14.23 mid-patch tier list update. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.